Hey everybody, it's Fabiology here. We are going to talk a little bit about experimental design today because a lot of AP questions, especially this year, are looking at experimental design because of this FRQ. And you'll always get at least one FRQ that deals with some experimental design. So let's just kind of hammer through what that looks like and kind of what it sounds like and some clues that you're going to want to use. So here we go. Today we want to be able to identify aspects of an experiment and to formally create predictions or claims with evidence and reasoning. That's kind of the big thing that they always ask you to do. So let's just do some quick vocabulary overview. We have a hypothesis. You may be familiar with some of these. A prediction in some way, a claim, a statement based on results. Data and evidence go together. And reasoning, an explanation or justification of your data. So this is kind of the content piece that you'll want to bring in, or what's going on based on the whole experiment in general. And that's where we really want to hammer down and really get everything all situated. So the way the AP test really goes through it is they have these terms like make a claim, determine, justify, state, identify. These are all things that they use in order for you to answer the prompt, right? AP, answer the prompt. That's the joke, right? So if you make a claim, it's a statement based on data. If you're going to predict, they ask you to do the same thing. It's creating a hypothesis, essentially, or a claim. Determine, making a claim based on the data, right? Justify, use your data to support your claim. State, make a claim. Identify, stating these variables. So that's what we want to be able to do over and over and over again, is identify aspects of the experiment and then make claims from it and then use our evidence for that. So a very classic experimental design that we've done in AP is the floating disk lab. Okay, a lot of us did this. You can see in the GIF, right? We take out all of the CO2 using those, the syringes there, and we suck out all the CO2 so they float to the bottom, and then we shove them into some sort of environment, and then we observe the photosynthesis, right? So as the photosynthesis is happening, these disks start to float up because they're starting to create those bubbles of oxygen, right? So let's just look at one that we did in class. So the experiment question was, how does photosynthesis rate change with different plant species? That's what one student group did. So whenever we do predictions, we want to look at if, then, because. So whenever you do an if, then, because, it should state the independent variable, provide what you believe is going to happen using the dependent variable, and then your reasoning. So an example, if we're thinking about independent, I change it, and the dependent, the data, would be something like this. If the photosynthesis rate is different between plant species, right? Plant species is our independent variable, then the amount of disk floating to the top will increase in dark leafy plants. So that's our data, right? We're counting how many are going to the top because they have a higher presence of chlorophyll. That's our content aspect. That's a reasoning about why we want to see, or what we're thinking about what we're seeing, and the reasoning behind it. So that's what they look for when you do those questions on those FRQs, is that if, then, because kind of style. It's one sentence. It shouldn't take long, but if you follow this framework, it's going to lead to a better, more concise answer, okay? So how do we know what we're talking about when we think about independent and dependent variables? Because sometimes it's not so much our own personal experiment, especially with FRQs, it's the experiment that we see in the data tables or the graphs they're giving us, right? They're giving this to us. So I always follow this idea of mix dry. So mix is manipulate, or I change it, right? That's what I am manipulating in my experiment. That's what I'm adding or tweaking to test, okay? It's your testing point. I for independent, and it's always on the x-axis. So when we think about time, time is an independent variable because we're allowing time to go on at, or if we're using time as kind of like the control, we have everything set at 15 minutes, then what did we change throughout that time, right? So in this case, it's not so much time here, but it's our independent variable of what are we changing each time we run the trial. We change the type of species, right? We can even see it in our title. between species comparison, right? So sometimes the title can give you clues, sometimes it's the x-axis, but really it's the idea of what's going on in the experiment each trial. And then the dry is our dependent. Think of dependent for D for data. It's the data they collected. So in this case, we were looking at the amount floating to the top, or the response, because that's telling us how fast the rate of respiration is going, right? It's usually found on the y-axis because we want to see some sort of a comparison, whether it's a bar graph or it's a chart or something showing us a response to this interaction, okay? So when we encounter these graphs on the FRQs or even a data table, we have to be able to interpret these ideas, right? So if I'm looking at this, what is the independent variable? What is the dependent variable? What is the control, right? That's what they always ask us. What do they not change to compare everything to? So this is a simple one looking at the height of seedlings for germinating seeds. So we want to think about looking at this data table. What's different? What are they comparing? Well, water type. So I guess my dependent variable is the type of water I used in my experiment. Okay, and then my dependent variable, what are we measuring? Well, we're measuring height. So we look at that trial average seedling height, average overall average height. Okay, so we're looking at these changes between our trials, right, with using deionized water versus whatever smoked water is, okay, and trying to make a claim. Did that affect our overall height, right? Well, it looks like it did, right? Because when we think about our deionized water, the average overall height was 23.4. But when we smoked this water, we have an average height of 59.5. So if it was me interpreting this question, I would assume that deionized water, which is just plain H2O, was our control group. And when we introduce this idea of smoked water, perhaps we added some CO2 in there that helped our photosynthesis and helped us grow a little bit more, maybe added some carbon, I don't know, right? But that's just something we could make in our justification of what happened overall. But we would just say as a claim that when we changed the water type, then we had an average height increase because of the presence of carbon in the smoke that was introduced into the environment that the plant used for growth, right? If I'm just going to try and make a claim and a justification. But that's what we have to do, is really think about what are we using, these clues, these headers, what are they measuring, right? We know our dependent variable is our data. We know that this is the independent variable. And then what claims can we make from it? So what I think you should do for mastery questions right now is just, this is a different lab that we've done in AP. It is a fermentation lab. So how does the type of sugar affect fermentation by yeast cells? So looking at our data table here, what is our independent and dependent variables? Okay, make a claim and state evidence to justify your answer, and create a new experiment that studies fermentation. Identify your variables then, right? So we can kind of see what our independent variable is here now, right? But if you were to change this, how else could you study fermentation? What thing could you manipulate? And that's your independent variable, right? So think about that. Try and create a new experiment. I'd love to hear what you come up with. I hope this all helps, and good luck to you all. Later.